data. Step 3 is describe the methods of analysis. In this step, the researcher needs to describe how he or she analyzed the data. Analysis of data requires operations such as establishment of categories, application of these categories to the collected data through coding where data is transformed into symbols for tabulation, and tabulation where data is put in the form of tables. For instance, if a researcher wants to study the academic achievement of dyslexia students in language, the researcher will compile data such as age, gender, grade level, and the language grades, the marks. And the two methods of analysis of data discussed here are quantitative method and qualitative method. Note that this section needs to be brief and the results should not be presented here. Quantitative research is a research methodology to collect and analyze numerical data, the numbers. On a careful understanding of the data, it is possible to predict the future of the product or service and make changes accordingly. For instance, a customer satisfaction survey enables the shopkeeper to understand the level of satisfaction of the customers with the products, services, and experience in the shop. Qualitative research, on the other hand, involves collecting, analyzing, and interpreting non-numerical data such as text, video, photograph, audio to understand concepts, opinions, or experiences of individuals. For instance, when a guest complains about the poor quality of food served and he or she demands a discount, the manager of the restaurant would need to verify the claims empathetically. So let's have a look at an example of the data analysis in the quantitative method first and then the qualitative method. If a researcher is analyzing the data using quantitative method, the following would be the description of how the data would be analyzed. As numbers are dealt with in the quantitative method, the researcher might describe the data preparation before analyzing, the software used to analyze the data, and the statistical methods used. The example here describes how the data has been prepared. One, by checking the missing data and outliers. Now, outlier labeling rule or outliers, it is that is you multiply the IQR, the interquartile range by 1.5, and in doing so, you get either an unusually high piece of data or a very low piece of data. And that high and that low piece of data is called the outliers. For example, you have a few scores, 25, 29, 3, 85, 27. So what would the outliers be? What is the number that is unusually low here? Number 3. And which is the piece of data that is higher? 85. So these are the outliers. Number 2, the statistical software used is SPSS to analyze the data. SPSS is a software that is used to analyze quantitative method. You just feed the software with the data that you have. They would analyze it. The software would help the researcher in putting it into table and analyzing it and even writing it as a report. And third one is the statistical method here used is the paired t-test. Paired t-test, it is used to find the difference between two variables for the same subject. For example, imagine you're comparing the marks of a subject, for example, math or science, in grades 8 and 10 of a same person. So that is a two variable here. The subject is math, and the two variables here is grade 8 and grade 10. A qualitative method, as the researcher focuses on words, the analysis would be based on language, images, and interpretations. The researcher might describe how he or she went about categorizing responses to identify current themes and patterns. Now, this is an example of analysis of data in the qualitative method. So this has been taken from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's 2012 TEDx talk entitled "We Should All Be Feminists." So when you write, so this is the qualitative data that I have gathered, the researcher has gathered. So you can mention that talks from YouTube were studied, and further, if novels, select novels were taken, you can say these are the select novels of Nigerian women writers were examined. And if any theories were used, you can say these novels were located or examined in the theories of Judith Butler and Kimberly Crenshaw, for example, of performativity and intersectionality. And then you can go to explain the data. The following words, phrases, and sentences is a description of how the analysis of Adichie's statement in her 2012 TEDx talk entitled "We Should All Be Feminists" could be done. One, how gender functions in Nigerian societies, such as how she interrogated the identity constitution of Nigerian women in Nigerian societies. Two, she considers gender to be a grave injustice as it describes how one should be rather than accept as one is. This such as how it located Adichie's talk within a new feminist politics termed intersectional performativity. And three, power structures, it including educational institutions, workplace, restaurants, political organizations, inform and dictate gender hierarchies. This suggests how it stressed on the need to debunk power structures that constitute discipline and re-signify the gender identity of Nigerian women and girls. So in this method, focus is on language, images, and interpretation of the data that has been collected. So over to the last step, which is to evaluate and justify the choices that you have made in the first three steps. Research methodology should make the case for why the researcher has chosen these particular methods, discuss why other methods were not suitable, and how this approach contributes to new knowledge or understanding. The researcher can also acknowledge limitations or weaknesses in the approach chosen. So let's have a recap of research methodology, which is the how of a research process. What is the research problem and how will the research problem be defined? What data will be collected? Who or where will the data be collected from? And how will the data be collected? And finally, how will the study be of relevance, including the limitations, recommendations? Can mention that. So as I said, let's have a peep into the research process, which consists of a series of steps in three phases with deciding, planning, and conducting to effectively carry out research. The steps or stages of a research process are as follows. One, selecting a topic. Selecting and developing a research topic is an ongoing process. It includes choosing a topic, narrowing the topic, and evaluating and revising the topic. Two, defining research problems. We've already discussed that. The purpose of the research problem is to enable the researcher to point out why the research needs to be undertaken, what is hoped to be achieved with the results. Next, extensive reviewing of literature. To understand the defined research problem in a meaningful context, we have to review the literature. There are two types of literature: conceptual literature, which includes the concepts and theories, and empirical literature, which consists of data found in existing literature that is similar to the problem under study. Next is developing hypothesis. Hypothesis is a prediction or assumption made based on previous research. Imagine you have a paper presentation at a conference tomorrow and you haven't prepared for it. Instead of preparing yourself, you go for a movie at night with your family or friends. You know what? You know that when you prepare, at least a night before the presentation, you will be able to perform well. What do you think would happen at the conference tomorrow? You didn't prepare. What did you do? You went for a movie. So the answer to this question will form the hypothesis, which maybe, if not preparing lowers the performance at the conference and I do not prepare myself, then I will not be able to present my paper well at the conference. Next is designing or preparing the research design. Just like how a house plan or blueprint is created by an architect before ordering material and setting dates for completion of the building, similarly, a researcher needs to prepare a logical and systematic plan or design before data collection and deciding on the techniques to be used for analysis in order to answer the research question. Next, we've already discussed, which is collecting data, which is a process of gathering and measuring accurate information on variables of interest. Next is analyzing, testing, and interpreting data. And finally, writing of drafts and the final research paper. The researcher writes the report in an objective style following the guidelines given either by the guide or the handbook prescribed like MLA Modern Language Association, APA American Psychological Association, Harvard, Chicago. The layout of the research paper, you can see you have the preliminary pages, you have the main text, the conclusion, and the final pages. So I have sample pages of a thesis. So here you have the preliminary pages, sample of a title page of a work, sample of an acknowledgement, sample of a prefix, sample of tables of content, sample of list of abbreviations, graphs, and charts, if any, and the final page where you have the bibliography or the work cited. And if you've done any paper presentation or publication, or if you received any awards, you can mention in the final pages. The recap criteria of a good research paper. It is necessary to note that the steps involved in a research process do not necessarily follow each other in any specific order. Furthermore, the title, research problem, research questions, research objectives, and data need to align with the methodology from the start itself. That is, how. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was indeed a great lecture by such an eminent scholar. I personally want to thank you for sharing this knowledge with us, ma'am.
Thank you,
Now,
Nandana.
thank you, ma'am. It's our honor, actually. Now it's time for you to